I'm sorry, sir, your payment was declined.
Please try again.
The payment hasn't been made yet.
Please take the item. I'll find another solution.
Dad, is baby Benjamin going to go to bed hungry again?
Shh. Amare, it's okay. Amare, it's okay. Daddy's thinking.
Excuse me, sir, don't return the milk powder. I'll pay for it.
No, ma'am, thank you. But I don't accept charity.
Then don't call it charity. Say that a human being doesn't let God's creation go hungry.
Neither of them knew that this ordinary Wednesday night inside a quiet supermarket would become the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Inside the supermarket on the island, Janet Okafor pushed her shopping cart slowly down the aisles looking at the imported goods. She didn't really need to be here. She had assistants, housekeepers, and drivers who could buy the entire store if she gave the command. At 9 on a Wednesday evening, the store was nearly empty. Just a few people picking up forgotten items. The night shift workers were beginning to round up for the night, and the tired cashiers were counting down to closing time. But Janet needed an escape. Her mansion felt too quiet, too empty, and she simply wanted to be around people. Janet Okafor stood in the payment lane waiting to pay for her bottle of expensive wine and a prepackaged salad, the same routine she had maintained for the past 2 years. At 32, she was the billionaire CEO of a massive tech and real estate company. She was a woman who commanded boardrooms and terrified older men in the business world. She wore a sharply designer suit even at this hour. Her styling made her look fiercely distinguished. Her diamond wristwatch cost more than some people's cars. But beneath that flawless exterior, she was also very lonely. She had not always been this cold. There was a time she believed so much in love, a time she opened her heart, but that was before she realized that her wealth was the only thing men truly loved about her. She had given up on love a year and a half ago. Her last fiancé had been exposed as a fraud who was secretly siphoning her funds. Men only saw her wallet, never her heart. The betrayal had cut her so deep that she built a solid wall around her emotions. She fired anyone who tried to get too close. She pushed away friends who tried to set her up on dates. She decided that building her empire was the only safe investment she could make. Because of her hardened heart, her massive estate felt like a graveyard, and her success felt completely empty. So she worked late, came home late, ate meals she barely tasted, and tried not to think too much about the emptiness. She would pour herself a glass of wine, look out over the glittering lights of the city from her balcony, and tell herself that she was fine. Power and money is better than love, which causes heartbreak. Loneliness was better than betrayal. As she stood there holding her expensive bottle of wine, her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion ahead of her. The line moved forward, and Janet found herself standing behind a young man who was clearly having some kind of issue with his card. He wore a faded shirt that had seen better days and held an infant in his arms, maybe 4 or 5 months old. He looked exhausted, and his face carried the heavy burden of someone who had been beaten down by life. A young girl, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, stood beside the man wearing a faded dress and looking up at her father with worried eyes. She was holding on to his trousers. Janet usually ignored people. She was used to minding her business, but something about the desperation radiating from the man caught her attention. "I'm sorry," the young man was saying to the cashier, his voice with emotion. "I need to return this. I thought I had enough on my card, but it was declined. I don't have the cash right now." He was holding a tin of baby formula. It was a premium brand of baby formula, one of the most expensive on the shelf. The man looked at it as if his entire life depended on it. His hands were slightly trembling. Janet watched quietly from behind, feeling a strange tightening in her chest. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with the tired patience of someone who had seen everything, was already processing the return. "That's fine, my brother. Do you have your receipt?" "Yes, here." The young man fumbled in his worn pocket with one hand while balancing the baby with the other. He found the crumpled receipt and handed it over. The paper was barely legible, worn out from being held tightly in sweaty palms. Janet watched as he held the baby closer as if trying to shield the infant from the terrible indignity of this moment. The older child tapped on her father's faded trousers. "Daddy, is the baby going to be hungry?" the little girl asked, her voice innocent but with a very adult kind of anxiety. "Shh, Amara, it's okay. We will figure it out." But the young man's voice cracked, and Janet saw him blink rapidly, fighting back tears. It was the sight of a man trying desperately to hold on to his last shred of dignity in front of his child. Janet noticed the way the man swallowed hard, looking away from the cashier as the transaction was canceled. She didn't know his story, but the struggle was showing all over him. His name was Timothy. Only a few months ago, his wife, Joyce, had packed her bags and walked out the door. She had screamed that she could not eat love, that she was tired of suffering, tired of a husband who could not provide the luxury she felt she deserved. She left him with a newborn and a toddler, disappearing into the city and leaving him to figure out how to be both a mother and a father with 0 naira in his bank account. He had spent the whole day walking from one construction site to another looking for daily wage labor, carrying his children because he had no one to leave them with. The cashier completed the return and handed back a small amount of cash. "Here you go. Have a better evening." "Thank you." The man took the money with a shaking hand and turned to leave. The pure defeat in his posture was loud. The baby started to whimper, feeling the tension in her father's arms. And something inside Janet broke. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just acted on an impulse that felt like the first genuine thing she had done in 2 years. She had spent so much time protecting her wealth from greedy men. But looking at this man, she saw no greed. She only saw a father who was breaking apart for his children. "Excuse me," she called out. The young man turned, his expression wary. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably late 20s or early 30s. His face was drawn with extreme exhaustion and worry, but there was dignity there too, a quiet strength that came from enduring more than anyone should have to. He looked at her perfectly tailored suit, her flawless makeup, and took a small step back, clearly intimidated by her presence. "I couldn't help but overhear," Janet said, already pulling out her designer wallet. "Let me buy that formula for you and whatever else you need." The man's eyes widened, then filled with a mixture of shock and unshed tears. I can't accept that." "Why not?" she asked. "Because I don't take charity. I'm a man. I am managing. I just miscalculated my balance tonight. I will figure something out." He stood tall despite his worn clothes. He was a father trying to protect his pride. The baby in his arms began to fuss, making small hungry sounds. The little girl Amara looked between her father and Janet with hopeful eyes. The little girl rubbed her stomach quietly. "It's not charity," Janet said gently, surprised by the softness of her own tone. "It's one human being helping another. Please let me do this." She stepped closer. She wasn't looking down on him. She was asking for permission to be kind. She could see the brutal war playing out on his face. A man's pride versus his children's need. His dignity versus pure desperation. The baby's cries grew more insistent, and that finally decided it. "Okay," he whispered, his voice defeated. "Thank you. Just the formula. That is all I need." But Janet had already turned to the cashier. "Ring up the formula and whatever else he came in to buy." "Just the formula," the man protested again, stepping forward. "My friend," the cashier said, her tired face softening into something like true compassion. "Let the madam help. The Lord knows we all need help sometimes." Reluctantly, the young man placed a few other items on the belt: a loaf of bread, a small sachet of milk, some bananas, and a cheap pack of noodles. Basic staples, the kind of groceries that revealed someone living on the very edge, making every single naira stretch. Janet looked at the petty items. It was barely enough to feed a grown man, let alone a growing child. Janet handed her black premium credit card to the cashier. "Add my items too, and give me 3 more tins of that formula." "Madam, that's too much," Timothy said, his voice laced with panic. "It's not too much, it's barely anything." And it was true. The entire transaction would cost her less than the bottle of expensive wine in her hand, less than the lunch she had ordered for her boardroom meeting that afternoon. To her, the money was invisible. To him, it was a lifeline. The young man stood silently while the cashier bagged everything. The older child, Amara, tugged on Janet's tailored coat sleeve. "Are you a helper?" she asked with the directness of small children. Janet looked down at the little girl. The innocent question pierced right through the thick walls she had built around her heart. "I'm trying to be," Janet said, crouching down to her level, ignoring the fact that her expensive suit pants might brush against the supermarket floor. "What's your name?" "Amara. That's my daddy, Timothy." Amara pointed her little finger. "And that's my baby brother, Benjamin. Benjamin is always hungry. He cries a lot." "Amara, don't bother them, madam," Timothy said, deeply embarrassed. He tried to pull his daughter back gently. "She's not bothering me." Janet stood up and accepted the receipt from the cashier, then handed the heavy bags to Timothy. "I'm Janet, by the way." "Timothy, and I don't know how to thank you. You have no idea what this means." He looked at the bags of food, his eyes swimming with overwhelming relief. "I think I do," Janet said quietly. And she did, somehow. Not from experience with hunger or deep poverty, but from knowing what deep desperation felt like. what it meant to be at the absolute end of your resources and feeling totally unsure how to keep going. She remembered the night she found out about her ex-fiancé's betrayal, the feeling of the ground completely disappearing from beneath her feet. Emotional poverty was different from financial poverty, but the feeling of drowning was exactly the same. They walked out of the store together into the cool night air. The massive parking lot was nearly empty. The security guards were sitting by the gate gisting. Timothy headed toward the dark road at the edge of the lot, balancing the baby and the heavy grocery bags. "You're taking public transport?" Janet asked, walking quickly to catch up with him. "With the baby and all these groceries, it's not far, just a few bus stops." He didn't turn around, trying to hurry away so he wouldn't impose any further. "Let me drive you home." Timothy stopped walking. "I've already accepted too much help for one night." "Timothy, it's late. You have 2 small children and heavy bags of groceries. Please let me drive you. My car is right here." She gestured to her expensive black SUV, the kind of vehicle that loudly announced serious wealth and success. Timothy looked at the luxury car, then at his tired daughter who was rubbing her sleepy eyes and his fussing infant. He finally nodded. "Okay, thank you. We stay around the mainland side. Do you know the route?" Janet did. It was the kind of area people referred to as developing, which really meant it was noisy and full of people working very hard to climb out of poverty. She unlocked the car. She helped him load the groceries into the trunk while Timothy settled the children in the plush leather back seat. Benjamin had started crying, that loud newborn cry that spoke of hunger. Janet started the engine. The air conditioning immediately cooled the inside of the vehicle. As Janet drove, navigating the busy roads that connected the island to the mainland, Timothy tried to soothe the baby. "I know, my boy, I know you're hungry. Just a few more minutes and we will be home." He rocked the baby gently, his voice full of an immense tender love that made Janet grip the steering wheel tighter. It had been so long since she saw a man display such pure, unconditional affection without expecting anything in return. "How old is he?" Janet asked, keeping her eyes on the road. 4 months, almost 5, and Amara just turned 4. She's a wonderful big sister. Timothy's voice was warm when he talked about his children. All the stress and intense worry seemed to be temporarily forgotten. "Are you doing this alone?" Janet asked, then immediately regretted the intrusive question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's okay, and yes I am." Their mother left shortly after Benjamin was born. She decided the poverty was too much, that she wasn't cut out for this kind of struggling family life. There was no bitterness in Timothy's voice, just a very heavy, tired acceptance. Janet felt a sharp sting of anger on his behalf. How could a mother leave her children just because things got difficult? How could anyone abandon a man who clearly loved his family this much? It shattered her preconceived notion that all men were the users and all women were the victims. "It's been hard, but we manage," Timothy continued softly. "What do you do for work?" "I was working as a factory loader, but the company closed down last month due to the economy. I've been looking for something new, but it is very hard with 2 kids and no money for a nanny. I have some places I go to ask for daily work, but in the meantime," he trailed off, looking out the tinted window. "In the meantime, you're running out of money for essentials like baby formula," Janet finished for him. "I'll figure it out. I always do. God will provide. I have a neighbor who sometimes helps watch the kids for an hour or 2. Something will surely come through." His faith was unshaken even in the dark. As they crossed the bridge into the mainland, the scenery changed drastically. The well-lit paved roads of the island gave way to pothole-ridden streets, crowded corners, and flickering streetlights. Janet followed Timothy's directions, turning down narrower and darker streets. The smooth ride of her luxury SUV became bumpy as the tarred road completely disappeared, replaced by red dirt and deep ditches. "Take a left here," Timothy instructed quietly, pointing toward a pitch-black path. Janet turned the steering wheel, her headlights cutting through the darkness. She expected him to point out a house even if it is old. But instead, Timothy told her to stop in front of a dark structure. Janet pressed the brakes and put the car in park. She looked out of her window, trying to adjust her eyes to the darkness. Her heart dropped. It wasn't an apartment building. It was an abandoned, uncompleted building project. Thick concrete pillars held up a roof, but there were no actual walls, no windows, and no doors. The ground floor was overgrown with weeds. It was a concrete skeleton completely exposed to the harsh elements, the mosquitoes, and the dangerous night. You stay here?" Janet asked, her voice barely a whisper, completely horrified. "Yes," Timothy said softly, looking down at his hands. "The security guard for the property lets us sleep in one of the rooms on the first floor. It keeps the rain off the children." "Thank you so much for the ride, Madam Janet. You have saved my children tonight." Janet sat frozen behind the steering wheel as Timothy opened the car door. The night air rushed into the cool interior of her car. She watched as this proud, loving father carefully stepped out into the dirt carrying his infant son, preparing to walk his little girl into a dark, abandoned concrete shell. Everything in Janet's perfect billionaire life collided with the devastating reality standing right in front of her. She could not let them walk into that darkness. She simply could not. She unbuckled her seatbelt and threw the car door open before Timothy could stop her. The humid, mosquito-filled night air instantly rushed at her. Completely different from the sterile, filtered air of her executive offices, she stepped out into the dirt, her expensive designer heels sinking slightly into the uneven reddish mud. "Madam Janet, what are you doing? Please stay in the car. This area is not safe for someone like you," Timothy said, genuine panic in his voice. He had already managed to balance the sleeping Amara against his leg while holding Benjamin and the heavy bags of groceries. Janet ignored him. The uncompleted building was in the dark like a giant, where no doors, no windows, just cold concrete pillars and a rough, unfinished floor. She could smell earth, stagnant water, and the sharp scent of a nearby refuge dump. "You sleep on the floor in there?" Janet asked, her voice trembling with an emotion she had not felt in years. "I spread some cartons and a wrapper for the kids in a corner that is protected from the wind," Timothy explained quietly, looking down in deep shame. "It is only temporary. I will find a better place soon. Please go back to your car. I don't want anything bad to happen to you here." Janet looked at the tiny baby in his arms, to malaria-carrying mosquitoes, to the biting cold of the rainy season. She looked at Amara, who was rubbing her eyes, too exhausted to even cry. Then she looked at Timothy. He was a good man, a man who had swallowed his pride to accept food from a stranger just so his children wouldn't starve. She remembered her ex-fiancé, a man who wore silk suits and slept on Egyptian cotton sheets, yet had a soul entirely bankrupt of honor or love. Here stood a man with absolutely nothing, yet his arms were full of unconditional devotion. "Put the bags back in the trunk," Janet ordered, her voice returning to the commanding tone she used in boardrooms. Timothy blinked confused. "Madam?" "I said put the bags back in the trunk, Timothy. You and your children are not spending another night in this concrete grave. You are coming home with me." Timothy immediately took a step back, shaking his head. No, I cannot do that. You have already bought us food. You have driven us. I cannot impose on your privacy. Look at us. We are dirty. We have nothing. We will ruin your house." "Timothy, look at me," Janet said softly, stepping closer to him, completely disregarding the dirt on his clothes. "I live in a house so big that it echoes when I speak. There are rooms that have not been opened in months. There is hot water, clean beds, and safety. If you will not accept it for yourself, accept it for Benjamin. Accept it for Amara, please." Timothy looked down at his son, who was stirring and getting ready to cry again for his milk. His resolve broke, his pride shattered against the undeniable reality of his children's suffering. With a slow, defeated nod, he turned around, gently pushed Amara back toward the car, and loaded the groceries back into the trunk. The drive from the mainland back to the exclusive high-security estate in Ikoyi was quiet. Amara had fallen fast asleep against the soft leather seats. Timothy sat stiffly, looking out the window as the landscape changed from dark, broken roads to brightly lit palm tree-lined avenues. When they arrived at the massive iron gates of Janet's estate, the security guards immediately stood at attention, saluting as the heavy gates swung open automatically. The car rolled up a long, beautifully paved driveway, stopping in front of a stunning modern mansion with massive glass windows that overlooked a private swimming pool. Timothy swallowed hard as Janet led them inside. The front door was opened by Mrs. O'Con, Janet's housekeeper, a plump, warm-hearted woman in her late 50s. "Welcome back, madam," Mrs. O'Con said before stopping dead in her tracks, staring at the ragged man and the two unkempt children standing behind her wealthy boss. "Mrs. O'Con, please take these groceries to the kitchen," Janet said smoothly, removing her jacket. "Boil some clean water immediately for the baby's formula, then run a warm bath in the guest wing on the ground floor. We have guests." Mrs. O'Con, recovering quickly from her shock, smiled warmly. "Yes, madam. Come, let me help you with the bags, my brother." Over the next 2 hours, the silent mansion was completely transformed. The sterile, quiet halls echoed with the sound of running water, the clinking of plates, and the soft cooing of a baby finally getting a full belly. Mrs. O'Con had not only prepared the formula but had also quickly warmed up a rich pot of soup and pounded yam for Timothy and Amara. Janet stood by the kitchen doorway watching Timothy eat. He fed Amara first, making sure his daughter was completely full before he took a single bite for himself. The sheer selflessness of the act fascinated Janet. Once Amara was full and her eyes began to droop, Mrs. O'Con gently carried the little girl away to the guest bedroom, leaving Janet and Timothy alone in the massive state-of-the-art kitchen. Timothy finished his food carefully, washing his hands in the sink. He looked around the incredible kitchen, taking in the imported marble, the stainless steel appliances, and the sheer wealth surrounding him. "Thank you again," Timothy said, setting the baby's empty bottle on the vast marble counter. "You've been incredibly kind. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Janet said. Timothy studied her, and Janet felt like he was seeing past the expensive designer suit, the flawless makeup, and the impressive title to the deeply empty woman underneath. He didn't look at her with the calculating eyes of the businessmen she dealt with, nor the greedy eyes of her ex. He just looked at her with human empathy. "You lost someone," he said. "It wasn't a question." "My fiancé, a few months ago," she replied, looking down at her hands. "He didn't die. He loved my bank accounts more than he loved me. He nearly destroyed my companies and my trust in human beings." "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly hard. Betrayal is a heavy thing to carry." "It is, but that's not your problem. Your problem is keeping your children fed and housed, and that's where I can actually help. You're a father trying to take care of his children. You're someone who needed help, and I'm someone who has resources and absolutely no one to share them with." Janet's own voice was rough with emotion now. "I always wanted a family. I wanted a husband who loved me for me and children to fill this house. But men only saw my wealth, and I closed my heart off. And now I have all this money and success and nothing that actually matters. You have no idea what this means. You've given me hope when I was completely running out of it." Janet left them there in the luxurious guest wing, Timothy holding his sleeping baby who had just been properly fed, Amara already tucked into a massive soft bed, hope replacing despair in the house. As she walked upstairs to her own massive empty bedroom, Janet felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Purposeful, useful, like maybe there was a reason to keep going beyond just going through the motions of running her companies. She'd been so lost in her anger, so isolated in her massive success, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to genuinely connect with another human being, to help someone in a way that actually mattered. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the guest suite, hitting Janet's eyes in a way they hadn't in years. She didn't reach for her phone to check the stock market or scream at her assistant about a pending deal. Instead, she laid there listening. There was a faint sound coming from the living area. Not the silence of a house occupied by a ghost, but the soft, muffled sounds of life. A baby's gentle gurgle, a young girl's light laughter. For the first time since she moved into this mansion, the house felt like it was breathing. Janet threw on a loose silk robe and walked down the staircase. She found the kitchen transformed. It was usually a sterile space rarely used by her, but now it was filled with the smell of warm pap and fried plantains. Timothy was standing at the counter carefully feeding Benjamin with a bottle, while Amara sat on the floor diligently coloring on a piece of paper. "Good morning, madam," Timothy said, his voice hesitant. He jumped up slightly, clearly worried he was overstepping. "I am sorry if the noise woke you. I was just trying to get the children settled before we leave." Janet leaned against the doorway watching him. He looked different in the morning light, less defeated, more solid. He had taken the chance she offered him, and though he still carried the weight of his past, he looked like a man who was finally catching his breath. "Sit down, Timothy. There is no madam at this hour and you aren't going anywhere yet. Sit, let's eat." The next few weeks became a rhythm of small, unscripted moments. Janet discovered that her empty home had been waiting for this exact chaos. She found herself coming home early, not to stare at her balcony and drink wine, but to hear about Amara's day at her school. She had enrolled her, or to hold Benjamin while Timothy managed the household chores he insisted on doing. One rainy Tuesday evening, Janet returned home exhausted. A massive merger she had been working on for 6 months had fallen through, and the betrayal of a trusted partner had left her feeling cold and brittle. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She walked straight to the terrace, hoping to drown her thoughts in the sound of the rain against the glass. She didn't hear Timothy approach until he set a mug of hot tea on the table next to her. He didn't speak. He just stood there respecting her space, which was the first time anyone had done that without expecting a business favor or a handout in return. "I lost a deal," Janet finally said, her voice cracking. She didn't look at him. She was terrified that if she looked at him she would see the pity she saw in everyone else's eyes. "My partner, he sold me out again. It seems I am the only person who hasn't learned that trust is a liability." "You aren't a liability," Timothy said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are just tired, Janet. You are running a race against people who don't have hearts, and you are trying to win it while keeping your own. That is not a failure. That is a strength. Janet finally turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at her like she was a billionaire. He was looking at her like she was a billionaire. He was looking at her like she was simply a woman who was hurting. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How do you stay so hopeful when you have every reason to be bitter? Your life was taken from you. You lost your home, your family stability, and yet you smile when you feed your kids." Timothy stepped closer, his presence grounding her. "I realized that the bitterness was only poisoning me. When I was in that uncompleted building, I didn't have money, but I had my children. And the night you showed up, that was the moment I stopped looking at what I had lost and started looking at what I still had. You saved me, Janet, but you also saved yourself, even if you don't realize it yet." He reached out his hand, hovering for a second before he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shockwave of warmth through her chest. "I spent my whole life thinking that being loved meant being needed for what I could provide," Janet whispered. "I thought I had to be strong, always. I didn't know I could just be." "You can just be with me," Timothy replied, his gaze locked onto hers. "I don't need your money, Janet. I don't need your contracts. I just need you. You are the only person who didn't walk past me when I was at my lowest." In that moment, the barriers Janet had spent years building didn't just come down, they evaporated. She realized that the loneliness she had carried wasn't due to a lack of money or power, it was due to a lack of genuine connection. She looked at Timothy and didn't see a project or a charity case. She saw the man she wanted to grow old with. She saw the man who had taught her that the richest thing a person could own wasn't a bank account, but a heart that was capable of being truly seen. She took his hand, holding it tight. "I think I have been waiting for you my whole life, Timothy. I just didn't know the package would look like this." Timothy smiled, a real bright smile that lit up the dimly lit terrace. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in her life, Janet didn't worry about the future, the board meetings, or the empty house. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her own. It was a rhythm she knew she wanted to listen to for the rest of her days. The house was no longer just a building, it was a home. And as they stood there in the rain watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Janet knew that the walls were gone. She had finally let someone in, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be all along.